Okay, so let's go with our extinction segment. Let's see if we can escape the planet. Okay, let's find out about that. Here's some news that came out this week. Okay, and it's got to do with our expedition to Mars. Okay, goes like this: 1 year on Mars. NASA analog astronauts begin mock red planet mission today, and you can watch it live. What is all this about? Well, they're preparing some people. Apparently, three astronauts. I think four are going to go. I don't know why they're preparing three, but they're going to be sending four astronauts to Mars. Two of them will descend on the planet and do their thing, and then they're going to come back. And that's going to happen, according to this note, anywhere between the late 2030s and the early 2040s. And the question is whether this is ever going to happen. Okay. Um, um, Says the round trip travel will be 500 days. Okay, that's over a year. 365 days a year. It's going to take about a year and a half, more or less, and that's just coming. That's just going and coming back. Okay, and you can see some of the things they got to take. 25 tons of supplies and hardware would be ready and waiting for the crew, delivered by a previous robotic mission. And then they go over some of the problems that they're going to encounter, like gravity, which will be the biggest problem, right? Okay, so we're going to Mars, apparently. Will we? Will we ever get to Mars? And more fundamentally, why? Why do we want to go to Mars? I mean, here we have four people, apparently. They want to go to Mars, or they will be sent to Mars. Are we ever going to evacuate the Earth, 8 billion people, and move to Mars? Is that a possibility? Terraform, as Carl Sagan would say, terraform the planet. Okay, is that ever going to happen? Or are we just going to evacuate the jails, the prisons, and send all these people out there and say, well, we're going to send you out there to Mars? Okay, who's going to go to Mars? Who's going to live in Mars? Are we going to start a colony like, when Columbus came to America, shortly afterwards, all the Europeans were coming to America, stealing land from the Indians, and doing their thing. Is that what's going to happen to Mars? For sure, I don't think we're going to encounter any Martians that are waiting for us, that we don't have to worry about displacing them or giving them bugs or whatever. But will we ever colonize Mars? And that's something for you to think about. Um, and these people are going to be doing something similar to what was done in the 1990s, I think 93, 94. And that's this, Biosphere 2. I went to Biosphere 2 down south near Tucson in Arizona, and they had 8 people enclosed in there. Eerily, very much like the 8 mice with which Calhoun started his experiment, his mouse experiment. Anyways, they lived there, and apparently they divided up in groups, and they had problems with each other, and they did 2 experiments, and then they shut it down. And since then, they've been selling this complex from one organization to another. They haven't done anything else in there. I think it's just a tourist attraction now. That's about it. But they still have the place there for people to live if they ever want to do the experiment again. And the question is, this other one, the one for Mars, are they going to be doing the same thing? They're going to be putting these 3 people inside a place for over a year and see if they what kind of problems they run into. Both physical as well as mental, right? Because remember, these people are going to be traveling for over a year and a half, round trip, and so they want to try to figure out what kind of problems they might run into. And my question is all of this worth it? I mean, we might as well send robots, right, to Mars. Maybe more sophisticated robots, maybe R2D2 kind of robots that walk and do the things and lift things and so on. I think that's a better deal than sending humans down there. I mean, what's the point of that? Especially to go lower them onto the planet, come back up, and come back home, like we did supposedly with the moon. Um, I don't know. I think it's kind of like a waste of resources. And the question is whether you know, as a taxpayer, would want to support such a venture, right? So these are things that people should consider. Now, in these projects, usually they develop a lot of technology, and that part's good. No problem there. But sending people out there, I don't know. Just the insurance on the lives of those people must cost a lot, even though they're taking risks. Anyways, they also have this Project Artemis going to the moon. And I checked it. It says NASA's human lunar exploration plans under Artemis call for sending the first woman and first person of color to the surface of the moon. And yeah, I did check, and they're legal. They have a diversity and inclusion department. Okay, they covered that base. And so what I'm suggesting is that, you know, maybe they should send a trans person out there. You know, that way they cover all the bases, men, women. Hopefully this person is both Jewish and has a black father and a Chinese mother, you know, and brother who is Buddhist. And that way we cover all the bases and we don't have to worry about offending anyone. You know, how's about that? Okay. That's my 5 cents worth on that. Again, I don't know why we're going to the moon, especially with people. Maybe we can send some robots that can do some excavating, some machines, and the robots handle the whole thing, and we can bring whatever minerals we need here on Earth. That I can understand. But sending people, what's the point of that? Are we ever going to live on the moon? Certainly, we can't terraform the moon because it's too little. We can't get gravity or air in there in the quantities that we would need. So we would always have to be, you know, suited up and living in some kind of, you know, house that we built out there for them, some place. And so here's my 5 cents worth on the moon landings for people who say, well, Bill, we never went to the moon, okay? And so, you know, I kind of summarize here what the typical arguments against the moon landings are. Many people say that a lot of that was done in Hollywood. It could have been done in Hollywood. And my counter argument against that is, you know, it's an invalid argument unless you can tell us the difference. If you cannot tell us the difference between doing it in Hollywood and the real thing, then you don't have a case. You can't bring that argument up. Only if you can tell the difference. Okay? If everything they did on the moon could have been done in Hollywood, you don't have a case. And they say, well, we saw this error and the other error and the other error. Well, I can tell you, if this was done in Hollywood, directors wouldn't have made so many errors, especially catastrophic errors. So the more errors you find, the more the weaker your argument is. Okay, so keep that in mind. Don't find more errors, because if you found one little error, that's one thing. But when you find 100 errors, then something's wrong with your interpretation, okay, about the physics up there. And some people think it's physically impossible to go to the moon. You know, we can't go through the magnetism that surrounds the Earth, or the solar wind that hits us once we're out in space and so on. They have all these notions. I think a lot of that is just a misunderstanding of physics. And all I can say there, we built the ISS, the International Space Station. We built it in space. It flies around the Earth several times a day. We have satellites out there, for those of you who believe in satellites. And they have taken pictures of the Earth from outside the Earth. How did we get those satellites out there, you know? And we have sent crafts to other planets and celestial objects. And so the question is, you know, if we can send a craft all the way to the moon to go around it and come back, why couldn't we send a human inside such a craft? That's my issue there. And then the last one, people say, well, there hasn't been a mission since we landed on the moon. That was, you know, 50 years ago. And the question there is, we never, and the issue that I bring there is that we had no need for one, okay? There was no need. It was a space race, essentially, and between Soviet Union and United States. And the United States said, hey, we got the gold medal, we got there first, no problem. But then what was there to do after that? Build a colony on the moon? What would have been the purpose of that, aside from the expense? tremendous expense, what are the profits? What's coming back? And the issue is nothing. It could be, some people might suspect and say, well, that was 50 years ago. Yeah, and where are we going now? Well, maybe we're trying to get some minerals, or explore the possibility of extracting minerals from the moon. I think that's the main one. Other than that, I don't see any purpose of going to the moon at all. Certainly not to inhabit the moon. And same with Mars. I mean, I don't think we're going to inhabit Mars ever. Maybe get there, yes. Back there, get there and come back. That I can grant it could happen. Stay there? No, no way. They're not going to be building anything out there and living there. Especially hundreds and thousands of people. No, no way. That's never going to happen. So the question is, why are we doing all these projects? Are we doing them to explore, to learn something about the solar system or whatever, if it's that important? I mean, there's a bunch of rocks around the solar system. So now we know everything we need to know. What else do we need to know about the solar system that is so important that we would spend money on sending people out there? So that's exploration. Are we going to do colonization? Are we going to really send people out there? And my answer to that is a flat no. And that's never going to happen. We might send someone up there, lands on the planet, comes back. That might happen, but live there, and start sending supplies and build a colony and expand? No. People are confusing Columbus with the logistics of what it would take to send someone to Mars. To the moon, we can even imagine that it's close by, but to Mars, a little more difficult. Okay. Anyways, here we have questions that people, or comments that people made since last time regarding autism and homosexuality. And these two people say the following. One says, the truth will come out soon. Autism is a vaccine side effect. And I think homosexuality is included as well. Okay, remember where you heard it first. Okay, thank you very much. Aren't you aware of the failure of the C-19 bioweapon injection? Oh my God, I wasn't aware that they were putting injections that are, what, bioweapons? Okay, and another fellow says, I think you should take school indoctrination into account regarding orientation these days. All I can say to these people is, they should listen first before they talk. I mean, I've said it several times. I'm going to say it one more time. I don't want to bore everybody who has been paying attention, okay? And here it is. Okay, here's Calhoun's experiment. This was done with mice. It was done first with rats, then with mice, okay? And the issue is the following. After a while, his mice, towards the end of the project, which lasted almost 2 years, they became homosexual and autist. Many of the mice became homosexual and autism. And a lot of them even lost all interest in sex completely. Okay, and so here we have animals. They were not injected with what, C-19, and they did not receive any indoctrination, as far as I know. Okay, so that's one issue. The other one is here's this one. Let me remove this one. Give me a second here. And this is the other one that I showed a couple times now. Here we have lions, mounting lions, and sheep also doing it with sheep, male sheep with male sheep. And so the question is, this is in the wild. In the case of the lions, it's in the wild, okay? The sheep obviously are under control of humans, but they're really out there in the pasture, etc. So they're in semi-wild, I guess you could say. But the point is that, you have homosexuality among animals, and in the case of Calhoun's mice, you also had autism created or generated in the lab. And no vaccines involved, no indoctrination. You have to explain that before you go out and say, oh, it's school, it's what we learn, it's it's how this guy was taught at home and so on. No, it's like saying, that a Down's patient was made that way at home by mommy and daddy, that He was okay until mommy and daddy, brainwashed him or whatever, or his school did, or his peers. No, no, that guy was born that way, and you got to explain that. And I'm saying that's got to do solely with genetics, okay, or at least most of it with genetics. If there's other factors, that's what can be discussed. But I don't think you can rule out genetics at all. Okay, what is it? I'm saying that we lost our genetic diversity. All humans are clones today. We have pretty much the same genetic structure. Despite that, we have mutations daily. We've had throughout history, right? Bottlenecks and founders effect, and here we are. We are all descendants of a relatively few that lived 100, 200 years ago. So if you go back in time, we are all more or less brothers and sisters in great measure because our great grandfathers, whether they were in Japan, in Africa, in the Americas, or Europe, it doesn't matter. They all went through the same sifting process with diseases. Diseases were the ones that they had to overcome. When they overcame those diseases, either by natural or artificial means, here we are. Okay? We are the descendants of those people, those who made it past the sifting process. Okay, that's why we're all the same. Okay, and one final issue here. A fellow says, gender identity disorder was used for its diagnostic name when it was introduced into DSM-3 in 1980. With the publication of DSM-5 in 2013, gender identity disorder was eliminated and replaced with what? Gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a handicap mental disorder. And all I want to add to that is that, in 1973, that's 50 years ago, the American Psychiatric Association declared that homosexuality was no longer a disorder, a mental disorder, which it had been until that point. And that was a great victory for the homosexuals because shortly after they were able to change the laws and say that sex between men, especially those two, but also between women, was no longer a crime, which was until then was a crime in many states at least and around the world. And shortly after that, they just kept changing the laws. But the funny part is that they only declared in 1973, they only declared homosexuality not to be a disorder. They left all the other letters of the alphabet in the code, and everyone else was still committing a crime. Okay, so keep that in mind.